introduce John Michael with GeneSight. And John Michael, you just take it away. I'm going to let you just describe everything you do, but thank you so much for sponsoring this morning. And everyone, do go in the chat and give us your contact information, okay? Thanks, John Michael.
I'm John Michael Criswell. I cover the Metro Atlanta area for Myriad Neuroscience and the GeneSight test. GeneSight's a product of Myriad Genetics, and it's the most utilized test of its kind in the country. 1.5 million patients have had it. We have 10 clinical studies published in the most reputable peer-reviewed journals that explain our need in geriatric psychiatry, as well as all other ages. And we can show that using GeneSight versus the trial and error approach will significantly improve remission rates, response rates, and those things that give you a headache. So I was connected to this organization by Resurgia Health Solutions. They use GeneSight as a medication selection tool to customize treatment plans for their patients. GeneSight helps their providers understand their patients, how their patients' genes affect the medications that they're choosing. So it helps them identify roadblocks that are caused by genetics so they can avoid side effects and reduce hospitalizations that occur from adverse drug reactions. We know that 50% of adverse drug reactions are preventable, and GeneSight is designed to identify these issues. Our studies also show that we save $2,000 per patient per year on those things mentioned, on top of not wasting money on medications that simply aren't going to work due to the patient's genes affecting the medications. So nursing homes and other senior care organizations are starting to really understand how we address a major issue, which is polypharmacy, that big gallon-sized bag of medications. We can help reduce that and help meet those GDR, those gradual dose reduction goals that are outlined for everyone. So it's a painless cheek swab test that, simply put, it tells you information that the patient cannot tell you. In mental health, there's no objective data that exists for prescribing. So GeneSight gives you the information that, like I said, the patient cannot tell you. It's like asking the patient's body for its opinion before prescribing another medication. So I'm going to show you a snippet of what the report looks like. So we look at 63 medications. This is just the antidepressant page. So imagine all of us are depressed, hopefully not, but if we were all depressed, we could all be prescribed the same medication for depression. The odds of it working for half of us are low. The odds of it working for all of us are impossible. It might work for some of us, but we know that our genes are causing roadblocks. So GeneSight categorizes medications in green, yellow, and red. Green is saying there's no genetic reason why these medications aren't going to work as prescribed. Yellow, there's moderate gene to drug interactions. I'll show you what that means. And then red, if we can avoid these medications, we know that these are the ones causing side effects. The patient just has a worse shot at getting better on a red medication. So what are these numbers beside the medications? This is what is the clinical consideration. And my screen is not moving forward. There we go. Clinical consideration. So this is what the prescriber and the nursing staff would work on together. So anything that had a 1 beside it or a 2, it's just about the dose. They either metabolize this drug too quickly so they could use a higher dose. We have one case study from one of our providers who with Seroquel, and she was able to justify raising that Seroquel to a very, very high level. I'm talking 1,000. And justify it. And the patient that it's doing amazingly. They haven't been to the hospital in years. They used to go once a year at least. 3 is also about dose issues, and then they get more complicated. But the most important one I'm pointing out here is that number 8, FDA label identifies a potential gene to drug interaction for this medication. That is huge to know. If the label says it for the drug, the only way you're going to find out if that patient is at risk is to do a GeneSight test. A great example would be risperidone, the most popular antipsychotic in the world. The label says if a patient is a poor metabolizer on a gene called CYP2D6, they are at risk for adverse reactions. 20% of us are poor metabolizers on that gene. So I do want to show the financial piece. You don't have to read all this, but every patient would get this. Highlighted Medicare Part B. It's free. Medicare covers it. They know how much we save patients per year. Medicaid in our state, it's also free for those patients. TRICARE retired, it's free. For commercial patients, it's between $0 and $330. And that's huge because genetic testing is very expensive outside of that. And then you ask who qualifies to get something like this? Patients on multiple medications, patients who have had one drug failure. Failure is defined by it didn't work as intended. Anyone considering a dose adjustment, a new medication, adding or removing a new medication, patients experiencing side effects. Our list of patients that can get GeneSight is really quite expansive. And I would just like to say, I think I'm under my time limit, but you can contact me anytime if you want to learn more or understand how to get GeneSight into your facility. We can do that. And I think that just about wraps it up. I'll
That's
put my
great.
information in
Go
the
ahead.
chat.
What did you say?
I just said I'd put my name and information in the chat.
Okay. And you had a PDF. Would you like for me to send that out to everybody?
Yes, John's going to send a PDF that's a sample report. It shows the whole GeneSight test. It tells you the genes we're testing. It shows you how we're different from every other company out there. And please reach out if you have any questions or want me to walk you through it.
Okay, that's great. Well, I was excited to hear from you today because I knew what you had to do was pretty powerful. And if it's not as completely unique, it's certainly unusual. All right, we are thrilled today to have Mia Chester, Program Manager for the Alzheimer's Association, but I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to ask Scott Morrison too. And we've got some great information that she's going to share with us. And I'm really pleased that we've had what a wonderful organization so well represented today. So Scott, take it.
Thank you. Mia has been in healthcare since 2005 and has served in management as well as program and service coordination positions for older adult populations throughout her career. She holds a master's degree in health studies from University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Mia has dedicated the past 12 years in service to the Alzheimer's Association Georgia chapter. Her role as a program manager allows her to lead local initiatives for the Alzheimer's Association, community-based education programs, and support groups. So Mia, with that, please share your presentation. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for having me. It's good to see so many faces and to see some familiar faces this morning as well. So the program that I'm going to share with you is called our Understanding and Responding to Dementia-Related Behaviors. And as some of you may know, the Alzheimer's Association is focused on supporting care partners throughout their journey to care for their loved ones. And one of the most common calls we receive at the association is, how do I deal with maybe difficult or challenging behaviors? So this program really addresses how family members can navigate those behaviors. But also I want to share with you that this is also a program that we can share with your clients, your residents, your organization. So please know that the association provides free programming. Usually it's 30 minutes to an hour long, depending on your time frame, but we would be happy to present this program to your group, just because we want people to know that they don't have to just be they don't have to just deal with the behaviors, that they can actually try to respond in a positive way, and we can teach them how to do that. So some of the objectives for this program, which happens to be our 30-minute program, and I'll keep it a little bit shorter just to make sure that I can answer any questions that you all might have or address any concerns. But the goal of the program is to identify common triggers for behaviors, explain the process for assessing and identifying challenging behaviors, and finally to list some common strategies for dementia-related behaviors. So next slide. So what we've come up with is a slide on what we consider to be the most common triggers for behaviors. So one thing to note about these triggers is that they may arise in the middle stages. They may be more prominent in the middle stages, although you may see people have triggers in the earlier stages, but I want to focus in on the middle stages and how we can navigate through those challenges. So just to point out a few, behavioral symptoms can be caused by a number of things, really. Physical discomfort, such as fatigue, hunger or thirst, UTIs, or just an uncomfortable room temperature. We may also see behaviors triggered by overstimulation. So this one is a really big one because isolation has really been prominent during the pandemic. So a lot of our calls to the association really have resulted in how do I provide, how do I comfort my mom or, help my father when we have to be isolated from one another, or when they do go to see their loved ones, they notice some decline in their disease progression because of the isolation. So all of those things we would consider to be a trigger, and honestly, isolation is kind of at the forefront of all of those. So a number of the other things, I'm trying to flip back and forth, fear and frustration. So a person may have some challenges with being fearful of a new place, maybe moving into a new community, or just being frustrated that they can't communicate with you or their loved ones, their wants or needs. And then the last two are probably the most obvious ones, but an unfamiliar surrounding causing that person to maybe act out or behave unlike themselves, or offering them a complicated task that they just can't carry out. And I always say to families, and I'm sure that you all know this as well, that when we are interacting with a person with dementia, oftentimes we will ask them to do tasks that we deem as simple, but simple tasks can really have a lot of steps. And I usually do an exercise with groups in person where we talk about all the steps involved with something as simple as brushing your teeth. And when people are done, they have maybe 10 or 15 different steps because, again, what we see as simple as go brush your teeth, there are many different things we have to take into account when doing that activity, and some that a person may forget, which would really let them or make them have trouble carrying out that task. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've tried to do is address how can we, deal with some of these behaviors. And we try to use a stance of not deeming all behaviors difficult, because we know that some behaviors are just a symptom of the disease. But sometimes behaviors they'll get labeled, difficult or challenging. But some behaviors are just what they are. So what we've created is a process of kind of decoding what those different dementia behaviors might be. So what you'll see first is detect and connect. We also say you always have to address the physical need, because that could easily be fixed by whatever might be going on and causing that physical discomfort. We then say address the emotional needs, because sometimes it is simply that a person may want to go home, or they may want to, they're not feeling socially engaged. So what can we do to address that emotional need and really make sure that that person is feeling emotionally fulfilled? And then finally, reassess and plan for next time. So the idea is that people don't have to get it right every time. We doubt that most caregivers or care partners will get it right. So we don't want to ever put that pressure on a caregiver or care partner. But there's always an opportunity for you to learn from the experience, and then do better the next time by applying some of the things that we were talking about. So before we move on, I always like to say that behavior is simply a form of communication. And if we remember that they're trying to communicate something to us, it will help us be able to navigate those behaviors a bit more. So I want to take a note from one of my old colleagues that retired from the association, and some of you may be familiar with her, but her name was Sarah Carson. And Sarah always, when she would teach this class, she would always ask the question, if someone were to go to a restaurant and someone living with dementia were to go to a restaurant and they're holding the menu upside down, what does that mean? And sometimes when she would do this to the different groups, people would come up with the most like complicated answers. And the answer to that is simply they don't understand. So what can we do to help them through that process? So again, if they don't understand, it may not be something that, big or an emotional or physical need. They may simply need cues or clues to help them through that process. So we say just be mindful that a person that is experiencing or exhibiting a behavior that we deem or consider strange, it may not be strange at all. It may just be because of the circumstance, and it's our job to help them through the process. Next slide. So these are our steps for going through that process, that 4-part process. And ultimately, these are suggestions and tips. I'm sure that most of you, if you've had an Alzheimer's class before, you've heard these tips. So it may not be new to you, but what we think is using these tips all together will help you be better at addressing what those behaviors might be. So ultimately, we want to see the world as that person sees the world, and we say join their reality. I always say if they tell us the sky is one color and we disagree, we can disagree, but we don't have to tell them that we disagree. We can just go with it. So seeing the world as they see it also helps us kind of decode what they're thinking and how we can better respond. So sometimes we can't figure out where a behavior is coming from, and that is probably more common that you go through this process and you still can't figure it out. So what we say is that it's really important for you to understand, who was present when the behavior took place, what happened actually, where did it happen? So does it happen in the sunroom every day around 4 p.m.? When, how, and what took place before, during, or after the behavior? So again, it's important to really figure out what's going on because there may be environmental factors that cause that behavior that you can easily fix. And then finally, we say approach the person calmly and respectfully. So many of us are familiar with Teach the Snow, and so I always tell families that it's important to learn the positive physical approach because it really does help in engaging with a person living with dementia because it tells you that your tone, your stance, all of that makes a difference in how that person responds and how they really evaluate our behaviors towards them. So I'd really encourage you all, if you're not familiar with it, just to Google TIPA's positive physical approach, and that will also help make the daily behaviors a bit more manageable. Next slide, please. So when we talk about addressing the physical need first, we always want to assess to see if there was a medical issue going on and look for those physical problems such as hunger or thirst. And then again, I talked a little bit about that, the lack of social interaction, which is really difficult right now. And as we get to a point where we're being around others a little bit more, that may improve, but we will still see some people with dementia may not want to be around others. So, it's important to find out or really think how you can help with that behavior, especially when a person doesn't want to have any social engagement. And then finally, look for environmental triggers for discomfort. So we have a lot of family members that contact us and they want us to kind of troubleshoot issues for them. And I wanted to share 2 stories with you specifically. One that was really puzzling to the family because they couldn't figure out why their mother was very irritable during mealtime. So each time during dinner, her mother would act out. She would, get up from the table, walk around, and they could not, get her to sit down. She wouldn't eat any food. And they thought it was just a simple action of her acting out. So they would begin to feel like, she was not thankful for their help. And it created all of these other issues. So they went through this process of just trying to figure out what was going on with their mother. Was it something emotionally wrong? What was there something else just going on? But when they finally got to the answer, she was simply having a problem with her dentures fitting properly. So she was hungry. She couldn't eat. And so that made her irritable, or I like to say sometimes hangry. We all have been there. But when they were able to get her dentures fitted properly, that behavior did not exist anymore. Another story that we have is that a caregiver she always took her mother out to outings to different places. And she noticed when they'd go to one particular store, which was one of the big box stores, she'd always act out. And so we talked to her about, think about going into one of the superstores. There are many people in there. There's so many sounds. It's bright, loud, things like that. And that can be overwhelming for a person with dementia. So, the simple answer to that was avoid it. Do you have to take her to that store? And the answer was no. She thought she was doing something good by having her go out to outings. And I said, well, you have to evaluate which stores you don't see that behavior, because maybe that's the best store for her to be in. And you avoid stores that may be overstimulating for her. Next slide. So we always want to see if there's an emotional need not being met, because that can obviously affect what behaviors a person exhibits. And we always say focus on the person's feelings, not facts. And what's important here is sometimes the words don't necessarily match what a person is feeling. Oftentimes when we've done our professional training, we would hear caregivers say that they go into, one of their residents' room and they'd ask, "How are you feeling, Miss Smith?" And Miss Smith would say, "I'm feeling great," but she'd have a grimace on her face. So it's important that that those things may not always match. And we have to kind of figure out what may be causing that pain or that discomfort, because there are times where they won't be able to tell us what's going on. So the last thing I'll mention here is we always want to redirect the energy into something more soothing, or something that is fulfilling for them. And one of the things that we can provide to you all is our list of 101 activities for a person living with dementia. And it's just a list of different things you can try to do to help redirect them, or, things that they can do to make them feel like they're a part of the team, because reciprocity is one thing that we definitely promote. They still have the ability to give, but it's on us to figure out what they can do and at what level they can do it. Next slide. So we're going to watch a video about Rose and how she utilizes different activities to keep her mother engaged.
She was part of the family. She'd fold towels, and she'd fold towels all day long some days. Just, put them back in the basket, and then she'd give them to her, here's some more towels. And it may sound like it's cruel, but look, it kept her busy. It kept her movements going. It kept her, just kept her occupied, and it made her feel wanted and that she was contributing. We created a routine for her that worked for her around her agitation and, her sleep patterns. So every day she was in the same routine for the most part. And every day she did something. She was always in the kitchen every day helping do something. Sometimes she'd rinse dishes, but she was always near the kitchen sink because she spent most of her life in front of the kitchen sink. Now she was just doing it in different ways. And going for a walk, going out in the car for a drive, walking around the yard, watering plants. Those are all things that she did, and we just had her continue doing them.
So Rose mentioned the, folding towels, job for her mother. And I know that many of you that are familiar with, some of our assisted living communities, they do this all the time. And it's interesting because when we kind of tell these different things to family members, they think it's silly. But we also say, do you want to get things done? And they're like, yes. And so we say, look at those different activities that you may think are pointless or silly. They may mean a lot to that person because it allows them to maybe contribute, in her case, contribute to the household. And it really was something that, it may be something that keeps them calm and occupied, and it prevents some of those behaviors from happening. So finally, we say that it's always important to reassess and plan for next time. I think I stressed to you that we may not get it right the first time, and that's okay. But what we want you to know is that all of these steps can be applied to any behavior with someone that is living with dementia. And now we'll kind of talk about what are the most common dementia-related behaviors. Next slide. So next slide, please. I think I jumped ahead, John. Sorry about that. So the most common behavior that we really deal with would be confusion or suspicion. And we see this present in many different ways. It could be a person not recognizing a familiar setting, maybe a home that they currently live in. They wake up confused and say, do I live here? Or they may misplace things and accuse others of stealing. And this part can be very difficult for caregivers or care partners, especially when the person can't remember, that they may have placed something somewhere and they can't retrace their steps to find it. So when we talk about confusion or suspicion, one of the best tips that we always say to our caregivers would be to stay calm, because it doesn't feel good, obviously, if someone's accusing us of stealing or misplacing things, but our job is to stay calm. And if we need to help them retrace their steps, that's what we need to do. So just remember that you will often see a person maybe become repetitive, and that's okay. Our job is to answer that question the same time each time. And maybe they will, recognize it, and maybe they won't. But it's important to always remain calm and be okay and forgiving. I'd say forgiving of yourself and forgiving of others as well. So next slide, please. All right, so this is just a reminder. There's quite a few case studies, and for the sake of time, I'm going to skip through them so we can skip through this slide, John. So the next most common behavior that you all might be familiar with will be aggression. And this one can be extremely unsettling, especially when you have a person that is combative or, even verbally abusive. So we always want to take aggression very seriously. And whatever those triggers may be for the behavior, we can identify them. And there are times where we may need to have others step in to help in this situation, because sometimes a trigger can be the person that is caring for the person living with dementia. And so sometimes it's helpful to just really assess when that aggression happens, who's around, or what are those things that causes that person to be so angry or upset. And we definitely want to make sure that when the situation presents in one that is unsafe, that we react as we should and act appropriately. I've had a couple of situations where people were in unsafe situations where it's probably, it's been a husband and a wife, or a daughter and a mother. But one of the stories that sticks out to me the most is where it was a husband and a wife, and when he would get angry with her because he couldn't recall where he would place things, his anger would elevate to 100 very quickly, and he would pull out a gun on her. And that is a very unsafe situation for her. And she would call us from her bathroom, and she'd lock herself in there and be crying. And obviously, this is what a lot of caregivers may be dealing with that we don't know. But we know that that is an unsafe situation for her, and that situation can turn quickly at any time. So that is something where, going through the detect and connect and trying to decode what happens may not even work. It may be a situation where we need to bring in our local law enforcement to help find out what's going on, so that that person can have a medical evaluation to see if there can be some interventions to assist with that. But I just stress that aggression is one that we have to be careful about, because it can turn at any moment. Next slide, please. And you'll have to click one more time. So just going over aggression again, to summarize, usually aggressive behaviors associated with dementia are upsetting, but not dangerous. And I like to change that. It can be, just depending on that person. Occasionally, the person is a danger to themselves or others, and safety measures are necessary to be put in place. So for that couple with the gun challenge, one of the easiest things that they were able to do was remove the guns from the home. But it also took some medication interventions to figure out what was causing that anger. Always speak to the person's doctor about medical interventions, and honestly, having 911 as a resource for people, and letting people know that they can call if they feel like they're in an unsafe situation when caring for their loved one is an option for them. Next slide, please. All right, so I think I quickly went over this. You also will see a person, maybe become repetitive, asking the same question over and over again, or, doing the same behaviors over and over again. And I always like to say, sometimes when we see repetition, it's not necessarily a behavior that we need to change. So you do have to evaluate whether or not this is the behavior that is that requires a action from us. And many times there are things that are simply just a symptom of the disease that we don't need to respond to. So I always say, if a person is asking the same question, answer them. They don't remember that they asked it just 5 minutes ago. So answer the question. And if it's not causing a safety issue, then we don't probably need to spend a lot of time on it, but we just need to remember that it is the disease, not the person. And then I always say that when interacting with a person with Alzheimer's disease or a form of dementia, it is more important to be kind than to be right. So we never want to argue with the person, because when we argue with someone, we're trying to get them to see the world our way. And a person in that middle to late stage just doesn't have that ability to accept that logic or reason anymore. And so it really is not a good use of your time as a caregiver or care partner. So we try to stress that to others. All right, next slide, please. All right, we have a video.
Repetition is really one of the most common and also frustrating behaviors for caregivers. It's important to really just take a minute, take a breath, and really think about how you could help that person with the answer that they're looking for. It really makes no sense to sort of bump heads with them and try to correct them or try to tell them to stop asking it, because they really can't remember that they just asked you that a minute ago. So thinking about how you could provide an answer that's reassuring, even though you might be doing it over and over and over again.
So again, we always want to maintain like an emotional distance from the behavior and not try to get too, worked up about it or involved into, what that may mean. So I always say it's important for the person that is providing the care to teach themselves, how to remain calm. If that's from using deep breaths to get through that behavior, do what you need to do in order to get through it, because sometimes tiresome, but it is up to us to be the one that changes and modifies ourselves to fit those situations. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to ask you to skip to the next slide, and we're going to talk about another common behavior, which is wandering. So at some point during the disease progression, approximately 60% of people that are diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease will wander. And this is one that we really want to make sure that everyone knows, that just because your loved one has not done it before, there is a possibility of it happening. So you want to make sure that you have things in place and really be prepared should that happen. So I think if we were to use the detect and connect slides or steps, this is really appropriate because sometimes wandering happens, at a certain time of the day. Maybe it happens because that person wants to go home and visit a different place. So sometimes that wandering may be an emotional need that's not being met. Using this 4-part steps can really help you identify what's going on and how you can better respond when that person wants to elope or simply wander. Maybe they're pacing around, and that's something that is safe to do if we allow them to do it in a safe space. So one thing I want to mention before I think I wrap up today is that we also we used to offer a program called Safe Return Medic Alert that the Alzheimer's Association has not renewed our contract with Safe Return. So we will not be providing scholarships for that Safe Return Medic Alert bracelet anymore. However, Safe Return does provide those identification bracelets for people that need them, and they have some scholarships available. So because the need has not changed, we know that people can still call Medic Alert, and that they'll be able to help them if there's any financial issues with getting that bracelet. But I always say, if anyone is diagnosed with dementia, your clients or friends or family, please ask them to get the bracelet, because just having that identification jewelry is really important if they do wander, because it will help law enforcement, first responders identify them very quickly. So just wanted to give y'all a quick update on that. And then the final slide is our programs and services. So just a quick reminder that we have a lot of information on our website from our community resource finder, which if you are a provider here with us today, I want to encourage you all to go and make sure that you're registered with us, because this is how we refer patients, or not patients, I'm sorry, how we refer our constituents to different services within the community. So if you go to Community Resource Finder, I'll put the link in the chat, and you'll click on the provider link, and it'll ask you to just put in some information about where you're located, what areas you serve, and then you will be a part of our information repository, and people that live within your service area, should they need your information, will be privy to that information. So just know we would love for you guys to sign up so that people can know about all the services that you provide within the community. And then we have some really great support groups. If all of you know Jeannie, so Jeannie's one of our support group leaders, and she has an amazing support group. Our support groups are virtual right now. And we hope that in the next couple of months, many of them will either move to a hybrid, maybe virtual or in person. But know that that is an ongoing resource that we can offer to many people. And our support groups are confidential. No information is shared with us, and our support group leaders are really at the heart of it. So again, I want to give Jeannie a shout out because she has a great group. So I think she put her information in the chat box for you all to know when that happens. And then finally, if you enjoyed the program, such as our behaviors program today, we do offer online training. So you don't have to have me come out or have me present, but if you want to have your staff or anyone else in your organization get some more training on Alzheimer's disease. We have free online education programs. And once they complete the programs, they have the opportunity to print out certificates for those different programs. So just know that on our website, you can find all of this information. So I want to thank y'all so much for allowing me to present today. It has been a pleasure. And always, if you have any questions or if you have clients that have questions, please let them know that they can always call our helpline at 1-800-272-3900, and they'll always speak to someone that is going to be master's level or higher. So we can always help them navigate through whatever situation that they're currently dealing with. All right. So does anyone have any questions for me or anything I can address before wrapping up?
As we age, anyway, we resist change. And most of us, I certainly can speak for myself, have dealt with a lot of people with different levels of dementia. And change is particularly challenging and stressful to people. And yet at the same time, as we age, the need to move into a more supportive environment becomes more and more critical. So do you have any, I know there's probably a whole series of topics or discussions on how to do that most ideally, but do you have any quick tips on a way to help a person that absolutely has to be transitioned from the home they've lived in forever to a child's home, an adult child, an assisted living community, or whatever it might be? Because
I think that's a great question. I think one of the tips that I use all the time is that we should make wherever they're moving to, if it's an assisted living community or a child's home, it has to feel like home for them. I think that's the key. So bringing in things that bring them comfort from their home. You may have to assess what can actually come, because they may be really emotionally tied to something that's large and that can't be moved into an assisted living community. But what are those things that are going to bring them comfort to make that new place feel like home? And I think that would be true in an assisted living community. But when we talk about a child, maybe an adult child's home, sometimes we don't make room for them to come in. So I'd say, giving them their own space and acclimating them to that new space can let them know, these are your things, where would you like it? Giving them the choice to decide how do they want things, when they're vocal and verbal, how do they want things? I think making it feel like home would be a great place to start, and incorporating those things that bring them joy or that has brought them joy throughout the years, making sure that that's a part of where they're living now is really important.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I was given the rest of you time to think about a question you might have, actually, by answering that question. Also, I wanted to know. I appreciate that.
So I saw one question come through about the Medic Alert bracelet. So you would simply just go to medicalert.org. And they also have a phone number that you can call. But I would say those are great resources for people that are living with dementia or any kind of medical condition that could potentially potentially have a need for first responders. For people to have that bracelet, it's really, really like the first level of security to have. But there are other options out there for safety. We have it on our website, a list of different safety devices that you all can look at. So they have scholarships. It used to be free. When the Alzheimer's Association offered the bracelet, we would give it to families free of charge. There was an annual fee and we'd pay it, until they didn't need it any longer. But I know that the Medic Alert Foundation, they do have scholarships available. So make sure you ask for it, or make sure you tell your clients to ask for it, because it may not be anything that is, promoted. So just know that they just need to lead with, I'm interested in a scholarship for Medic Alert, for the Medic Alert break.
And the 101, whatever the resource you mentioned in your talk earlier, is that something that I should perhaps email to everybody, or is just a link, or what do Do you remember
Sure,
that?
I can send it to you. And I'm sure you can Google it and there's different versions out there. But I'll be happy to send it to you after the call. I just don't have it with me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I just am now experiencing my own mom beginning this journey. She's got just a mild case of dementia, and I can't tell you how much this helped me today. Thank you.
You're welcome. And please know I'm here to help you all. They said in the beginning, I've been with the association for I'm approaching my 13th year now. And so I want to be a resource to you all. One of the things I love is just working with families and helping people. So I'll share my email address. Feel free to email me and I can help you with any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Mia.
just had a quick question. I'm Keisha from the Mansions at Sandy Springs. So very informative. Thank you very much. And letting the families know that's a good resource. Are the paramedics and police officers here in Georgia been trained to handle those with dementia or this disease?
Yes, and that's a great question. So we provide first responders with an hour-long education program during their, oh gosh, the name escapes me right now, but they have a week-long training session. And we are part of that week-long training session where we come in and really work with them to talk about how to best respond to a person that is living with dementia, because we don't want it to be, mistaken for anything else. First responders do receive training and it's based on their jurisdiction. They also receive a pocket card, or we have an app now that tells them questions that are important to ask to be able to determine very quickly, because we all know first responders have to act very fast, if this could be a situation where the person has any cognitive impairment. So we do work with law enforcement during their initial training period. And Kim Franklin, who's my colleague in the Atlanta area, she has provided those trainings for years. And I just can't think of the name of them right now, but please know that that's something that we take very seriously. And we want people to know that the officers are taught how to best respond specifically to a person living with dementia.
So thank you again, Mia. It's an excellent presentation.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.